On the other hand, right now we're starting Parshas Vayeshev, very difficult parsha, as it were. The brothers paskin on Yosef to sell Yosef, and Yosef gets sold into slavery, and he's 22 years in Mitzrayim till he is reunited with his family. Very hard parsha. Very hard parsha. And according to the Meforshim, many of the things that we see in this week's parsha, the fight between the different Shvatim, is what causes the strife that we see today amongst Klal Yisrael. I think most of us feel even more pained when we hear about all the different factions amongst Klal Yisrael than even the anti-Semitic things that happen or that we read about, because the Goyim, we don't expect too much more from them than anti-Semitism. And even the Rambam says anti-Semitism is really rooted in their jealousy of us, that we were given the Torah and they weren't. So it's almost like we can't blame the Goyim for what they do. That's who they are. But Klal Yisrael is supposed to be one. Klal Yisrael is supposed to be a united nation. Not the United Nations, but a united nation. And yet we fall short so often. And according to the Chazal, that's why we don't have a third Beis HaMikdash, because of Sinas Chinam, which we read about every day, which we hear about every day, which sometimes we even experience it amongst our friends and relatives, unfortunately. And certainly the political situation here in Israel, which how much more could we accomplish just in a practical way if we joined together and help each other? And even normal things that people should strive for, people are in competition with each other and want to deny each other. It's a very sad situation, but especially on a higher spiritual level, how much we could achieve if we join together. Like the receiving of the Torah, ki ish echad b'lev echad. Who doesn't want to receive the Torah again? Third Beis HaMikdash. Beis HaMikdash was a place where we were united as a nation. Everyone gave yearly to the Beis HaMikdash, which joined everyone together. The korbanos were all a joint korban between all the korban seed. Every korban seed had all of Klal Yisrael was joined together on those korbanos. We were joined together. We came up 3 times a year to join physically. The Beis HaMikdash was like the heart of Klal Yisrael. So the Maharal even says it wasn't that it was destroyed and that brought the tragedy. It's because we're disunified that the Beis HaMikdash could be destroyed even. Because once the heart was not joined together as one nation, there was no need to have a Beis HaMikdash, because it was supposed to represent our unity, not otherwise. In any event, so that's another part of this parsha which is hard to read, to see the brothers fighting with each other. And even though we had Cain and Hevel fighting, which was certainly the root of a lot of strife in the world, and Esav wanted to kill Yaakov, but again, that's from the outside. This is from the inside. This is the brothers themselves, who the creation of Klal Yisrael is in these parshas, and it's fraught with strife. It's a very hard parsha but it could also be the source of unity, because the whole story ends with the brothers being reunited and hugging and kissing each other and crying and appreciate how much we really do need each other and how much we misread each other, how much they misread Yosef. They thought he was a haughty upstart who might be as bad as Esav trying to take over. They considered him a rodef even, but how wrong they were, and how wrong we all are when we judge other people wrongly. And we're constantly doing that. We're constantly judging people. And for example, even in Pirkei Avos, it says each one of the things they say in Pirkei Avos affects all of us. And yet, right at the beginning of Pirkei Avos, it says, having masunim badin. You should be masunim. Matun means to, like the word lahamtin, to wait, patient. Don't just judge quickly. Certainly a judge has to know that. But why do we have to know? Why is it in Pirkei Avos for us? Because we're judging people all the time. Every day we're judging people. I see someone, I don't like their nose, I think they're an idiot, or they speak a certain lisp or something, I think, oh my gosh, what a fool. I had a chavrusa for many years who had hearing aids, 2 hearing aids. And before I learned with him, I thought he was not all there, because he didn't talk the way we talk, he didn't hear everything correctly. Thank God, when I finally learned with him, I saw he was one of the most amazing guys. I remember how hard it was for him to find a wife, and I remember the joy at his wedding when he finally did find a wife. But we judge people all the time. We judge people for the good and usually for the bad, unfortunately. And therefore, we're all in the position of having Masuni Madin. We have to be matun, we have to be slow, we have to be careful and cautious. We get home, somebody says something, we fly off the handle. Did you even hear the whole sentence? Did you even hear the whole story? Having Masuni Madin. The brothers also could have certainly learned a few doses of this Maimer Chazal, having Masuni Madin. But we have to remember that this whole ordeal was in some way Mina Shemayim. The whole ordeal of the brothers going down to Mitzrayim, it was all predestined. As Rashi says, when Yaakov sent Yosef to the brothers, it says he sent him Me'emek Hebron. And what does Emek Hebron tell you? Rashi says Hebron is on a hill, not an Emek. Emek means a valley. He didn't send him from the valley of Hebron. There is no valley of Hebron. Hebron is on a mountain, Rashi says. And whether you agree geographically with Rashi or not, but Rashi says the Torah is teaching us a lesson over here. What is the Torah teaching us a lesson? Me'etza amuka. The word emek can mean a valley, but it can also mean amok, deep. Eitza is like a counsel. You take counsel with someone, advice, counsel. Eitza amuka, very deep counsel. Shel oisoi tzadik, of that great righteous forefather, hakavur b'Chevron, who's buried in Chevron, meaning Avram. L'kayim mashenamar l'Avram bein habesarim. The promise that Hashem had made to Avram bein habesarim, ki ger yezarecha, that your nation will be, your seed will be a foreign nation, will be a stranger in a foreign land. So this was to eventually come out through the story of Yosef. That means that everything that we see in the Parsha was not only a personal tragedy between the brothers, but it was also a triumphant carrying out of the will of God, of the great promise he had made to Avram, which sounds like a horrible thing. Your nation will be a stranger, but somehow that was important in the building of Klal Yisrael. So, part of what I want to talk about, I wrote in the newsletter, which is that we find in these kind of stories a lot of different elements, as we just pointed out. On the one hand, it's a tragedy, on the other hand, it's a great plan of God. That I once heard a shmooze from Rabbi Aaron Feldman's brother, Rabbi Emmanuel Feldman, who is a great speaker as well. And he pointed out that during the whole story of Yosef and the brothers, there's really two things going on. There's the larger picture that Hashem has a plan to carry out. Everything is to bring about special components of Klal Yisrael, to build Klal Yisrael through this whole story. But there's also the personal element, which is each person has an aveira, which they have to be metaken, which they have to be paid back for by Hashem, so to speak. So there's the larger picture of the nation, and there's the smaller picture of each individual. And the truth is that we're always experiencing both. We always have our personal lives, we're always part of a nation. And everything that happens in our life, we have to remember, it is part of my personal cheshbon with Hashem. He may be punishing me, teaching me, trying to guide me in the right way. But He's also guiding me as a part of Klal Yisrael. And everything that's happening, everything we read about is part of the larger picture to bring Mashiach. For example, I couldn't find the Chazal I thought there was a Rashi, but the truth is, I remember there's a Midrash for sure. that Rashi brings a little bit of it, but not the real picture I was looking for. Right in the middle of the story of Yosef and the brothers, Yosef is sold, and then the parsha discusses towards the end how he ends up in the house of Potiphar, with Ashes Potiphar, and then he ends up in prison. The story is really about Yosef in conflict with the brothers, being sold to slavery, and ending up in prison, and that sets him up later to be brought out in next week's parsha to rule Egypt. And right in the middle, there's a story of Yehuda, and he gets married, and he has three sons, who two of them die, and they were married to a tzaddikus named Tamar, and the whole story with that. What's that doing in the middle here? What is that? What do I need that in the middle? So there's a Chazal somewhere that says something which I think is more to what we're saying now, but I'll just read the Rashi first. Rashi asked this question really. Lama nismacha parsha zu lakan. What do we need this in the middle? The hifsik. So it's a hefsik, it's an interruption, but parsha social Yosef. This is really a parsha of Yosef. The whole story of Yosef. Yosef this, Yosef that. All of a sudden in the middle, Yehuda gets married. Oh yeah, I'm glad to hear it, but what's that doing in the middle? Lilamei, to teach us, because everything in the Chumash is to teach us a lesson. Shaharidu echad mikadulaso. That, like it says at the beginning of this story about Yehuda, by Yered Yehuda. Yehuda went down. He went down to this place where he ended up marrying this girl. But it's not just he went down physically, geographically, he went down spiritually. The brothers demoted him. They took him down. They demoted him. Mi gedulaso. He was really like a king. He was their leader. They looked up to him. But once this whole story happened, they took him down from that. Kisharo b'tzaros aviha. When they saw that the story, which they didn't think it would affect Yaakov that badly, Yaakov refused to be consoled. He just cried and cried and cried for years and years. And he didn't have any Shechina. For all those years that Yosef was away, there was no Shechina that came to Yaakov. It was a horrible situation, a catastrophe. Amru, so the brothers said, Ata amarta lemachra. You told us to sell him. First they passed him to kill him, and then they decided to sell him. They said, you told us to sell him, and we listened to you because you were our leader at the time. Ilu amarta lahashiva. If you would have told us to return him to our father, if you would have told us to overturn the psak and go back and give him back to send him home, hayinu shomim lecha, we would have listened to you. So they were very angry with Yehuda. So we see already a bit of tshuva in the brothers. But more so, we see that Yehuda had to leave. He had to go away from the brothers. He was like estranged from the brothers. I don't know if it was an official cherem that they put on him. But he had to leave. He felt he had to leave. He had to get away from the brothers because they didn't look up to him anymore. They were very angry with him that he had misled them in a sense. A leader is supposed to always think beyond the little situation right in front of you. He's supposed to see the bigger picture. If they would have seen the bigger picture, would have thought into how's it going to affect Yaakov. In fact, later when Yosef reveals himself, what is his first thing he says to the brothers? Ani Yosef, Oda Bichai. Is our father alive? And the Chazal said, what do you mean is our father alive? The whole time they're talking about their father, their father, their father. He knew he was alive. But the Chazal say that he was giving them tochacha. They said, oh, you're talking about this and that, and everything's so important, but I'm Yosef, and his father's still alive, meaning did you think about that when you sold me, how it would affect our father? That it would take his life away from him? That it would take away his Ruach HaKodesh? That it would kill him, in a sense? That's what he was telling them, tochacha, when he reunited with them. And that's what Yehuda should have thought of. That's what the brother said. You should have thought of that. That's what a leader's supposed to do. So what happened to Yehuda? He had to leave. What happened after he left? He has a whole strange story with his two children who were Rishoyim, who Hashem killed, and then he had one left, and he withheld Tamar from that boy, and the whole story with she dressed up like a Zona. One of the strangest stories in Chumash, I think. One of the stories it's hard to tell to children. What was she dressed up as what? Oh. right? But it's there in the middle of Chumash. And as Rav Nachman Bolman once said, if it's in Chumash, that means it's part of Torah. That means it's something we have to think about. So the whole story is very strange. But it's not as bad as when two daughters have relation with their father, which was we had a few parshas ago, where the two daughters of Lot tricked their father into having relations because they felt, we have to do it for the survival of mankind. We have to do this, l'shem shamayim. And Chazal actually say they did have in mind l'shem shamayim. But from those two strange relationships, Yehuda with this Zona woman, who turned out to be his daughter-in-law, and Lot with his two daughters, came out Mashiach. Came from Lot Mashiach, came from the strange relationship Mashiach, and came from over here. Right? And Peretz was the great-grandfather of David HaMelech, who was the great-great-grandfather of Mashiach. And he married, we had the story where Ruth was brought into the scene from Moab, and she was from the Zerah of Lot, and having had relation with his daughter, created Moab. So Hashem says, look, before this whole thing, Yaakov was crying, and Reuven was crying also. Reuven felt horrible. He had tried to save Yosef, but he came back and Yosef was gone. He tore his garments. He was one of the big Balei Tshuva. He did tremendous Tshuva over here, Reuven. He was one of the big Balei Tshuva, Reuven. He felt horrible that his plan to try to help Yosef had not been executed properly. And everyone's crying, and Yehuda's being brought down, and then Shem says, and I'm trying to bring Mashiach. All this is going on, all these minor tragedies, but I'm trying to bring Mashiach. That's what he was doing over here, trying to bring Mashiach. And that's what we have to remember, that everything that's going on has two major threads. Our own personal lives and what we're supposed to learn from every pasuk we learn, every halacha we learn, every story we learn in the Chumash, etc., every Gemara we learn, and everything in our lives are supposed to teach us a lesson. And Hashem is talking to us through the things that happen in our life. He's giving us tochach in a very silent but efficient way. That's our own personal life. But there's a larger arch that we're part of. Bring Mashiach, bring the final Geula. That's happening every minute. Every minute, the same moment, Hashem is doing both. Hashem is capable of at the same time doing both. He can juggle all the balls at the same time. But this is something we have to remember. We see an interesting point of this in the middle of the Parsha. When Yosef is being sold, the Torah again says something which is a bit out of place. Rashi again comments that something's out of place. And that's why a Jew is always supposed to notice when something's out of place. Of course, when you get home and your wife did something wrong, you're not supposed to say, that's out of place. But when you try to learn wisdom, that's the best way to start to learn wisdom. When Moshe Rabbeinu saw that the sneh was burning, but it wasn't being eaten, it says he went to see what was happening. Why do you have to see what's happening? Run the other way. Take your sheep to where it's not burning. No. It was an amazing thing. He wanted to see it. He wanted to understand it. It was chachma that he had to understand. And that led him to a divine revelation of Hashem, one of the biggest revelations. Right? Ekia Asher Ekia. And the whole coming of Geula began at that point. Because he said, I'm going to try to see what's going on. Something's out of place. We have to remember that that's the beginning of wisdom. And that's why Jews always ask questions, and that's why the Haggadah is full of questions, and everything, the Gemara sets itself up in questions. That's the way we learn. So Rashi asks a question in the middle of the Parsha. What's it doing here? What's doing here? It says when they sold Yosef, this is in Perek Lamed Zayin Pasuk Chav Hei. It says Vayeshu Lecho Lechem. They had just paskened Misa on their brother. So they sat down to eat. It was a big avera, and later they regretted having sat down to eat a meal while he's screaming from inside the pit. But at that very moment, Vayisu Eineihem, they lifted up their eyes. That means they became more ruchni. They took their face out of the food. Right? A lot of people, they just keep their head in their food the whole time. No, Vayisu Eineihem, they lifted up their eyes. That brought the Geula. Vayiru, and they saw, Hinei Orchas Yishmaeli Ba Migilah. There was a caravan of Arabs Yishmaelim, right? They're always in there. The Arabs are always in there somewhere, right? V'gamleihem nosos nochos suri v'loy hoichem l'hor b'Mitzrayim. They were on a caravan doing business like Arabs always do, right? They were trying to make a buck. But Rashi says that even back then, what was their normal business? Neft. Even back then, Rashi even asked it as a kasha. Lama piercing makasavis masam. Why do we need to know what they were carrying? Just saying, we saw a caravan. They decided chaparine and sell him, make a few bucks. Why does it have to mention what they were carrying? No, again, to teach us a lesson. Lahodia, to let us know, matan schar shel tzadikim, how great is the reward of tzadikim. She'ein darkin shel arabim laseis el neft. The normal way of an Arab, even back then, was to carry neft. The itran, another bad smelling thing. Shereichan ra. Normally they carry things that smell horrible. But lezeh nizdamnu b'samim. But at this very moment, because they were going to take Yosef, Hashem made it that they're going to be carrying sweet-smelling spices. Shelo yuzak mireach ra. That the tzaddik shouldn't be damaged from the bad smell. Now the Arabs are carrying this bad-smelling stuff all the time. Did they die from it? No. Would Yosef have died from having smelled it? No. But he would have been damaged, Rashi says. Some kind of damage, some kind of not to be thinking properly, right? For a Jew, not to be thinking properly is bittul Torah. Could be that's a horrible thing for a tzaddik who likes to think in Torah to suddenly be confused by a bad smell. Maybe it's even so bad he couldn't learn. I don't know. But the major thing I believe is, like Rashi says, Lahodia matan scharin shel tzadikim, to show us their reward. Now this is very strange. And before Shmuel asks, this is he's being rewarded. This is Yosef being rewarded. This is probably the lowest moment in his entire life. His brothers just sat down and paskin on him that he's a rodif. That means they completely didn't get who he was. And they were all against him. Can you imagine your entire family being against you? I'm certain all of us have had moments when we felt our family was against us, but usually they weren't calling us murderers and throwing us into a pit. And the Chazal say there was akrabim and nachashim down there. Right? There wasn't water, but there was snakes and scorpions down there. It's a question, did the brothers know that? They didn't know that. According to the Orach Chaim, they knew it. They could see it was down there. Why did they throw him into a pit like that if they didn't want to kill him? Because they said, if we kill him, we're using our Bechira. So we don't really know if that's the Yad Hashem. If the scorpions kill him, they don't have Bechira. It must be the Yad Hashem. Alright, look at the Orach Chaim. Coach. Right? But the point being, this is the lowest moment of his life. He'd been thrown into a pit with scorpions. His brothers were sat down to eat bread. They so much didn't care that he's screaming, help me, save me. Tati's gonna cry if I don't come home. They sat and ate bread. And later they actually regretted it. They were so callous that they could sit and eat bread. The lowest moment. Now he's being sold into slavery. You know what that's like to be sold to? Mitzrayim was the worst possible place to be sent. It was Shtufei Zima. It was like completely worse than Times Square. One of the most disgusting, pornographic, disgusting, illegitimate places in the world at that time. It was the center of culture with quotation marks, not real culture, but, right? That's where he was being sent. And Yosef HaTzadik, and we see that he ultimately was very much tested there. It was a very big test. He had to run out without his garment to avoid having illicit relations down there. And this is what he's headed for. He's headed for being a slave. He may never see his family ever again. He may never have a chance to do Yiddishkeit the right way. It's very hard to keep Yiddishkeit when you're a slave. He probably tried as hard as he could be. Right? He couldn't find a minyan down there. No Kriyas HaTorah. Right? And probably no Korban Pesach down there. Not yet. Right? So, probably is the lowest moment in his entire life. Right? Have you ever had a low moment in your life? Like you can look back and say, that was the lowest moment in my life. And yet Rashi says, at this moment, the Torah wants to teach us, Matan Scharin Shel Tzadikim. How great is the reward of the Tzadikim? Very hard to see that. So, what does it say? What's the reward? That he could have had, the normal caravan is carrying neft and itran. It's very horribly disgusting smelling things. And he was given a caravan that was carrying these beautiful smelling besamim. That's his reward. Right? So put it in a pan. Nice smelling thing, and losing your family, losing your freedom, almost being killed by your brothers who hate you, who despise you, think you're a rodef, and you're going to the worst place in the world where they never have Yiddishkeit again. That little pan that's holding this Basami, how can you call that reward? How can you say he's being rewarded? How do I see him being rewarded over here? And Rashi says, Lahodia, so let us know that Hashem rewards the tzaddikim. Strange. The answer is that this whole thing was a tikkun. This whole thing was a tremendous tikkun, as we said before. Not just for the Klal Yisrael that needed to go down to Mitzrayim. There's an interesting Gemara in Shabbos that we know, the famous Gemara, that it says you should never favor one of your children more than the others, and we learn that from this story in this week's Parsha, where Yaakov favored Yosef, and it says because he gave a little bit more linen to him to create his garment nicely, that for that the brothers were jealous, and it turned out that they went down to Mitzrayim because that little bit of extra fabric he added to Yosef's garment. So Tosfos asked, what do you mean? It was already promised that Bris Meina Basari, Geri Zarecha. He brings what Rashi brought. So what's going on over here? Ella al yidei zeh sha'arei arba'im. It was already these are 400 years that they would, right? But he says just like the 400 years started 30 years before the birth of Yitzchak. That means most of it we were in Eretz Yisrael. We were not the leaders here yet, but we were ger in a way, but we had a better situation than in Mitzrayim. So he says it could have been the whole thing here, the whole 400 years could have been here. We could have been here with the 400 years that was promised to Abraham. But because of this little thing, we had to go down to Mitzrayim.